In this very in-depth forecast, two main regions are being monitored for severe weather, where in the south across western Texas, messy to discrete storms could harbor the potential for a couple tornadoes, massive hailstones upwards of 3 to 4 inches, and destructive wind gusts. In the north across southern Nebraska into the Oklahoma Panhandle, widespread messy storms could harbor the potential of an isolated tornado or two, scattered damaging wind gusts, and scattered large hail. Everything you need to know on Project Gladiator. Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today I'll be covering the weather for May 3rd of 2024. Sorry if the video quality isn't up to par with previous videos, because I am still sick, and I am kind of fighting for energy to be here and make this forecast video for y'all today. So please forgive me if I don't sound as well, or if the video quality isn't up to par with previous videos. But I just want to come on here and be able to cover the weather for today, even if it isn't going to be the best video quality. I feel that it is important still, regardless. So taking a look at the weather for our SPC outlook, we do have two main regions that we are going to be covering. We do have an enhanced risk for western Texas, as well as a slight risk for southern Nebraska, western Kansas, eastern Colorado, and the Oklahoma Panhandle. For our risks for today, we do have a 5% tornado risk for western Texas, with a 2% that extends up into southern Nebraska. For our damaging wind risk, we do have a 15% for both the enhanced risk and the slight risk locations, with a hatched area where we could see the potential for some destructive damaging wind gusts with some of the storms for in western Texas. And then for our hail risk, we do have a 30% for the enhanced risk region, which is going to be the primary driver for that enhanced risk region, where we could see the potential of some massive hailstones across western Texas, upwards of 3 to 4 inches. And then we do have a 15% hail risk for the slight risk region in the north, where we could see the potential of some scattered large hail. And then for tomorrow, we do have an enhanced risk for western Texas, and a marginal risk that extends all the way up into Illinois and southern Wisconsin. Risks for tomorrow do include a small 10% hatched region, where we could see the potential for maybe an isolated strong tornado or two, but we could see the potential for a couple tornadoes, potentially even a few tornadoes across that 10% region. I may not be going live for this tomorrow, but if you do live in the affected area, definitely make sure you are watching for updates on that, as tornadoes could definitely be strong. For our damaging wind risk, we do have a 15% for western Texas into central Texas, with a 5% that extends up across the rest of the marginal threat region, as well as a 30% hail risk, where we could see the potential of some massive hailstones. And then for our day 3 outlook, we do have a marginal risk for the central plains of the Mississippi River Valley, for Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana. And then for our day 4, day 8 outlook, we do have a 30% for the central plains, where we could see the potential of some widespread significant severe thunderstorms upcoming. We will continue to watch this as it progresses closer and closer. Then we also do have a day 5, 15% for the Midwest into the Ohio River Valley, for southern Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, western Kentucky, western Tennessee, Missouri, Arkansas, and eastern Oklahoma there, and a day 6, 15% for Missouri, eastern Oklahoma, Arkansas, northern Louisiana, and northeastern, north central Texas there, where we could see the potential of some upcoming significant severe weather. Taking a look at our excessive rainfall outlooks for today, we do have a moderate risk just to the north of the Houston metro region, with 2 other marginal risks for portions of the Midwest there, for eastern or western Pennsylvania into West Virginia and southwestern New York there, as well as a marginal threat for the Central Plains for southern Nebraska into southwestern Iowa and northwestern Missouri into Kansas, as well as a pretty large marginal threat that extends all the way from southern Oklahoma and western Texas all the way into southern Kentucky, where we could see the potential of some isolated flash flooding. But for our moderate risk, we could see the potential for some widespread flash flooding, which could definitely be significant in some regions. And then for our day 2 outlook, we do have a pretty large slight risk for central Texas into southern Oklahoma, as well as a marginal threat for that little valley that runs through central California, where we could see the potential of some isolated flash flooding. But for the slight risk, we could see the potential for some scattered flash flooding. Then for day 3 outlook, we do have a slight risk for eastern Oklahoma, eastern Texas, into western Arkansas, western Louisiana, and southwestern Missouri, where we could see the potential of some scattered flash flooding. Taking a look at our winter weather outlooks for today, we do have the potential for some pretty heavy snowfall for a lot of the elevated portions of the Rockies and along the western coast. Therefore, elevated portions of California, Oregon into Washington there, where we could see the potential of some pretty heavy snowfall in some elevated portions of those states. Same for our day 2 outlook, where we could see the potential of some pretty widespread heavy snowfall for elevated portions of Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, Utah, Idaho into Wyoming. And then for day 3 outlook, we will continue to see the potential for some pretty widespread heavy snowfall for elevated portions of the Rockies for Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Utah, and Colorado there. Taking a look at our weather models, starting off with our 500 millibars and our surface observations and how those are going to work in conjunction to indicate the risk for severe thunderstorms for today. In the south, we do have a pretty moderately strong subtropical jet out of the Pacific Ocean here. That is supportive of the risk for severe thunderstorms across this region, but shouldn't necessarily trigger them. We do have a dry line that has set up across western Texas, and that should trigger our severe thunderstorms across this region. With 500 millibar flow being a little bit more on the lower end side of things, upwards of 30 miles per hour. That's definitely a little bit more on the lower side of things and won't really necessarily support terribly strong speed shear. But we will check our 200 millibars for our speed shear. But we could see definitely a little bit more of a limited hail risk, but still see the potential for for some massive hailstones regardless, depending on our 200 millibars. Off to the north, we do have a little bit stronger flow, as we do have a little bit of a jet here that is pushing out of the Rockies with a trough that is just behind it. And we do have some stronger flow with 500 millibar flow that is expected to get upwards of 50 miles per hour across this region, which will be supportive of our risk for severe thunderstorms. And we are expected to see our storms likely fire off of either warm air advection or potentially the stationary front that's going to be set across this region. Taking a look at our 850 millibar winds and our low-level jet and how that will affect our directional shear and our risk for tornadoes across this region, we are expected to see a moderately strong to potentially more lower and low-level jet across this region, which will still supply this region with quite a lot of decent storm relative velocity and directional shear and be supportive of the potential for tornadoes. Shouldn't really see anything too crazy as far as the potential of tornadoes, but it is May, so we usually see at least one tornado report per day for any supercell that develops. Because it is May, we have a lot of instability across the majority of the central plains. And that's kind of the case for today in the last couple of days as well. We do have a pretty moderately strong low-level jet, but we do have lots of instability across this region, which will be supportive of a couple tornadoes and potentially a intense tornado or two across this region. The tornado watch that is currently in place across this region does in fact mention a couple of intense tornadoes being possible, and I'm surprised they didn't increase this region to a 10% tornado risk as a result of the wording in the tornado watch. And you'll see the energy helicity index values, and they're very supportive of the potential of strong tornadoes as well. So I'm actually kind of surprised that they didn't upgrade it, or they didn't upgrade it at the 4 p.m. or the 2000Z update. But this low level jet continues up across the rest of the tornado risk, where we could see some pretty decently strong directional shear up into Nebraska, where we could see the potential of tornadoes as well, but the majority of our instability will be more limited further down to the south. Taking a look at our 200 millibars and how that will indicate our speed shear across this region for our risk for hail, as well as our overall risk for severe thunderstorms, with our spreading of our wind vectors and how that will supply lift to this region. Starting off with the southern mode with that enhanced risk region, we do have some pretty noticeable defluence across this region, with flow out of the west kind of taking a northwest path, northeastward flow path here. You can very clearly see that's the substantial difference in our wind vector direction there. We definitely have some noticeable defluence, and that will be a major aid in our risk for severe thunderstorms across this region. Further off to the north, where we do have that trough that is pushing into the region, we do have a weaker 200 millibar flow, upwards of 70 knots. And in the south, we do have a mid-level flow upwards of 80 knots further down to the south, kind of out of the way of where our storms are expected to be. However, that will likely push off to the north, where we could see 200 millibar flow upwards of 90 knots while our storms are developing, and that will definitely support very strong speed shear across this region and be very supportive of the potential of hail. And then off to the north, we don't really have any noticeable spreading of our wind vectors, but we do have some pretty strong 200 millibar flow, where we could see the potential of some pretty strong speed shear across this region, and will be supportive of the potential for some scattered large hail. Taking a look at our storm relative velocity and how that will indicate our potential for tornadoes across this region, across the 5% tornado risk across western Texas, we do have some pretty moderate directional shear that isn't contamination. Where you see that pink, that is mostly contamination from our convective allowing bottle, but anywhere else we do have some pretty decent storm relative velocity values, upwards of 100 to 200 meter squared a second squared of storm relative velocity. Before storms develop, we do have some pretty decent storm relative velocity, upwards of 200 to even 300 meters squared a second squared of storm relative velocity, which is very supportive of a tornado risk across this region. And with it being May and the fact that we'll have some pretty strong instability across this region, I definitely think that a significant tornado is definitely possible. And again, I'm actually kind of surprised that they didn't increase it to a 10% tornado risk. And further off to the north, we will have a little bit more lower end storm relative velocity values, but by the time our low level jet increases, those will quickly pick up, with storm relative velocity values reaching upwards of the upper 200 meters squared a second squared. With more limited instability, we'll be able to support the potential for maybe one or two brief tornadoes across this region. Taking a look at our bulk shear values and how that will indicate our risk for hail across this region, we are expected to see some really strong bulk shear values across this region, with bulk shear values that are expected to get upwards of 60 to 70 knots across this region, which will be very supportive of the potential for widespread massive hailstones. We could definitely see the potential of hailstones that could reach upwards of 3 to 4 inches across this region, and could definitely be very detrimental to life and or property. So definitely make sure that you are paying attention and staying weather alert if you live in the affected area. Even with that tornado risk, you still want to be staying weather alert, but hail can also be a very dangerous factor as well. And then further off to the north, we will have some pretty strong bulk shear values, as we do have that trough, a little bit stronger flow aloft, not at our 200 millibars compared to further down to the south, but at our 500 millibars, we do have a little bit stronger flow, but we do have overall weaker bulk shear values, so I guess our 200 millibars doesn't really make up for it. With bulk shear values that are expected to get upwards of the mid 60s and maybe approaching an isolated 70 in some region, which will be very supportive of the potential for some scattered large hail across this region with more limited instability. Taking a look at our dew points and how that will affect our instability across this region, we are expected to see some pretty high dew point values, with dew points that are expected to get upwards of the low 70s across this region, and the widespread upper 60s and the widespread mid 60s, which will be very supportive of the potential of some really large amounts of instability. We could definitely see some really high amounts of instability across that region. Further off to the north, I've been saying that we are going to see more limited instability because we are going to see much more limited moisture, but dew points that are probably going to be more limited to the mid to low 50s across this region, which will support overall lower end instability, but will still be sufficient for the potential of some severe thunderstorms across this region. Taking a look at our temperatures and how that will affect our instability across this region, we are expected to see some really hot temperatures across the enhanced risk region as storms develop, with temperatures that are expected to get upwards of the low 90s, with temperatures that are expected to get into the upper 70s and the low 80s in the regions where we do have some stronger dew points, upwards of the low 70s. We don't really have too much overlap between temperatures in the 90s and dew points in the 70s, but where we can see some really hot temperatures overlap, we will definitely have some really large amounts of instability across this region. Further off to the north, we are expected to see some pretty decent temperatures as well, with temperatures that are expected to get upwards of the mid to upper 70s across this region, which will support some pretty decent instability amongst lower end dew points across this region, but will still be sufficient to fuel the risk for severe thunderstorms, with the possibility of some more lower end storms, but definitely not more of a marginal risk. We could still see the potential of some more upper end storms, with some hotter temperatures across this region and weaker dew points, and we could still definitely see some pretty decent dew points or instability values across this region. Taking a look at our lapse rates and how that will affect our instability and our risk for hail across this region, we are expected to see some pretty strong lapse rates across this region, with lapse rates that are expected to get upwards of the mid to low 8s across this region, and the upper 7s as well, which will be very supportive of some pretty large amounts of instability across this region, be a massive aid for our hail risk as well. As that will expand our layer for hail development to some pretty large sizes, and with the strong bulk shear values that we already have, again, we could definitely see the potential for some massive hailstones across this region. And then off to the north, we have some really strong lapse rates as well, with lapse rates that are expected to get upwards of the low 8s and the upper to mid 7s across this region, which will also be supportive of some pretty decent instability across this region, which will definitely be needed with our weaker and dew points across this region, but will also be pretty large aid in our hail risk as well. Taking a look at our 700 millibar temperatures and our convective inhibition and how that will affect our instability and our overall risk for severe thunderstorms across this region, starting off with our temperatures, we are expected to see some pretty strong warm air advection out of the south into the Texas region. It isn't necessarily going to extend all the way up into the slight risk region, but we do have some warmer air advection at 700 millibars that is extending up into the slight risk region. So we do have at least a moderate to strong elevated mixed layer that is being advected across this region. But we don't really have a cap across this region. The cap has already broken because storms have already developed and are currently ongoing. However, we are expected to see convective inhibition rapidly increase again as the sun sets, because we have really strong warm air advection out of the south. So by the time the sun does set and we lose surface heating, that convective inhibition will almost immediately be put back into place, and will almost immediately choke off our storms around the midnight hour for the enhanced risk region. Same goes further off to the north, but we don't have nearly as strong convective inhibition or warm air advection out of the south, so we won't have our storms be choked off as hard But we will definitely have them slowly be choked off with the fact that we will have convective inhibition ahead of our storms, at least a little bit of convective inhibition, which will be weakening them down a little bit. So we shouldn't really have anything too crazy severe happen with our storms, especially with our lower end dew points further off to the north in the middle of the night with our convective inhibition that is expected to be across this region. But regardless, our storms aren't really expected to be doing anything too crazy off to the north, but still could pose some hazards. Taking a look at our instability and how that would fuel our risk for severe thunderstorms for today, we are expected to have some really large amounts of instability across this region, with cape values that could potentially reach upwards of the upper 3000s and even approaching the mid to upper 4000s across this region, with mainly some small pockets that are going to be getting upwards of the 4000s, but they could definitely get really high in those 4000s. So we are definitely expected to have some really large amounts of instability, and with some moderately strong directional shear across this region, storm relative helicity, we could still see the potential of some couple of tornadoes and the potential for some strong tornadoes being possible. And then further off to the north, where we will have more limited instability with more limited moisture, but definitely a couple of aiding factors, we will see cape values that are expected to reach upwards of the upper 1000s and the triple digits, the upper triple digits across this region. That will fuel the risk for severe thunderstorms across this region to support the risk for some scattered hail, scattered large hail, and the potential for some scattered damaging wind gusts, and the potential for an isolated tornado or two across this region, which is definitely all plausible, especially with how instability is expected to decrease as storms actually develop down to the lower 1000s and the upper triple digits across this region, which will still be sufficient to fuel our risk for severe thunderstorms across this region, and still be sufficient to fuel the potential for maybe one or two brief tornadoes, the potential of some scattered damaging wind gusts, and the potential for some scattered large hail. Taking a look at our surface-based cape, I don't really have a whole lot to say about this other than the fact that the majority of our most unstable cape is expected to translate down to our surface cape, so we are expected to see surface-based storms and the potential for tornadoes across this region. Same with further off to the north, where we will have some pretty decent surface-based cape that will translate down from our most unstable cape, which will support the potential for tornadoes across this region, in addition to the potential for some large hail and the potential for some damaging wind gusts. Taking a look at our 0 to 3 kilometer instability and how that will aid in our overall risk for severe thunderstorms across this region, we are expected to see quite a lot of 0 to 3 kilometer instability across this region, which will be a very large aiding factor in the potential for severe thunderstorms and the potential of tornadoes, with some really strong 0 to 3 kilometer instability values that could potentially reach upwards of 200 in some small pockets, but mainly ranging anywhere from the mid 100s to the double digits, which is still definitely going to be a pretty large aiding factor in our risk for severe thunderstorms and the potential for tornadoes. Further off to the north, we are expected to see a pool of 0 to 3 kilometer instability as well, with 0 to 3 kilometer cape that is probably going to be mainly reaching the double digits across the northern slight risk region, which will still be an aiding factor in our overall risk for severe thunderstorms across this region, but it will definitely be a little bit more on the weaker side of things, and will definitely be a little bit more of a more subtle aid across this region. Taking a look at our energy helicity index values and how that will indicate the potential for tornadoes across this region, we are expected to see some pretty high energy helicity index values that are expected to get upwards of the 6 to 5 and potentially even some 4s across this region, maybe even reaching the 8s in some small pockets. We are definitely expected to have some really high energy helicity index values across this region, which is honestly why I'm kind of surprised why they didn't increase this to a 10% tornado risk with the possibility of strong tornadoes, because even the tornado watch indicates that we could see the potential for multiple strong tornadoes across this region, as I mentioned previously. Further off to the north, we do have some more spotty energy helicity index values, but we do have some decent instability values across this region, with energy helicity index values that are expected to get upwards of the low ones to potentially the twos in some regions, which is indicative of the potential for 1 or 2 brief tornadoes across this region. Taking a look at our damaging wind gusts and how our wind gust models will indicate the potential for damaging wind gusts across this region. Again, we are expected to see more of a potential for some scattered damaging wind gusts, but those damaging wind gusts could definitely be significant, with damaging wind gusts that could potentially reach upwards of 60, maybe even approaching 70 miles per hour and even 80 miles per hour. It could very well be ranging anywhere from 70 to 90 miles per hour across this region with some of these damaging wind gusts. We just don't really see it here because of the fact that we literally go off the chart. The damaging wind gust that we see here literally goes off the chart, so literally doesn't go any higher, indicating that we are definitely expected to have some really strong damaging wind gusts across this region, and will be very supportive of the potential for some scattered damaging wind gusts that could definitely be destructive across this region. Taking a look at our hail parameters on our meso-analysis page and how that will indicate the potential for massive hailstones across this region. Starting off with our significant hail parameter, we do have a area of, I think that's 8. I can't really see it too well, but I think that's an 8 there, indicating that we could very well see the potential of some significant hail across this region. And then we can also look at our SARS hail size. With our strong directional or strong speeds here across this region, really strong instability values, we could very well see the potential of hailstones upwards of 4 inches, indicated by the widespread white across this region. And then as far as our significant hail percentage goes, the shaded areas do indicate our percentage for significant hail. So we do have a couple areas that do indicate 90 here. We do have a 90% there, with a widespread 80 across the majority of this region, indicating that we are most likely going to see the potential for some significant hail across this region. I'm not really sure what the unshaded contours mean, because they aren't indicated on here. But as far as our large hail parameter goes, we have some very, very widespread pink values, which are very indicative of the potential for large hail across this region. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the socials for Project Gladiator and join the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator. If you lived in any of the areas I covered for today, please stay weather alert for the time being. If you notice anything might have been wrong with this forecast, or you would like to make a suggestion or ask a question, please leave a comment. 3 other channels I highly suggest you check out are One Nation Weather, Weather Watcher, and JaxonWX, and hopefully I'll be able to see you guys tomorrow with another forecast.